Well, hello there, and welcome to the Mix 6 podcast as part of the Mix, the UK's #1 digital support service. I'm Tom Pinks. I'm your host for this episode, and whether it's content, community, counselling, or crisis, the Mix are here for you, whatever you may be going through. In this episode, in this very special episode, we're talking about loneliness in young people. An ever evolving and increasing topic and issue in young people. And we have the perfect person to talk about this today. Her name is Lara Rodwell. She's a London-based writer, journalist, and youth loneliness advocate. In 2023, she launched the Lonely Club, which is a mission to address the loneliness epidemic in young people by hosting events and fostering connections between young people to talk about how they're feeling and to make meaningful connections with each other through brunches, walks, you name it, she's got it. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, it gives me huge pleasure to introduce Lara Rodwell. Hello.
So nice to be here.
Lovely to see you. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. The sun is out. It's Friday. It's all looking good.
You can't say Friday because this comes out on a Tuesday. So
damn.
We'll backtrack that.
It's Tuesday.
Lara, it is a real pleasure to catch up, and I'm very aware of you and what you do, and I just can't wait for you to share that with our audience today. I introduced you. I don't think I did it justice, though. Can you give us your own introduction about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I wear a lot of hats. I kind of actually trained after I was at school as an artist. I did a fine art degree because I loved kind of painting and drawing and doing art as a kid. And then I spent a lot of time at the States working at American summer camps and knew I loved working with children. And then I decided that I loved to write. So I decided to do a journalism master's and write a book out of the blue. And then during my master's, I decided I wanted to set up a community for young people who felt alone. This was kind of prompted by the pandemic and feeling quite lonely myself and always having felt quite lonely. So now I'm kind of a mental health advocate, writer, journalist, and community founder, which I absolutely love.
You're right. That is a lot of hats. We could do an episode just on your hats. We're going to talk about your personal journey with loneliness in a little while, but I don't know if you're familiar with the Mix 6 podcast, but with this podcast, we kick things off with the quick fire 6. So 6 snappy, this or that questions to just get the blood pumping, get the conversation flowing, and to let the audience know a bit more about who you are. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Number 1, Instagram or TikTok?
Instagram.
Your favorite movie, book, or song?
Ooh. Anything Harry Styles. Daylight by Harry Styles.
Okay, that's a song.
That's a song.
That's a song, okay, because I think he's done a book and a movie. He's another guy with a lot of hats, isn't he? There might be an unofficial biography out there somewhere. Question number 3, would you rather walk backwards or skip for the rest of your life?
Ooh, skip the rest of my life.
Nice. I would choose skip as well. It's just a lot happier, isn't it? I think we're walking backwards.
A field of flowers. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Or even just down Liverpool Street. Perfect.
Yeah.
Your number 4, your number 1 self-care top tip.
Yoga every day, even if it's for 5 minutes.
Nice. You seem quite regimental about that.
Yeah.
It's got to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a morning yoga person or an evening?
Morning, yeah.
Morning, yeah. Before the sun comes up?
When I wake up.
When you wake up. So about 11?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2 p.m.
Question number 5. What is your favourite place in the whole wide world?
I am half Polish, and we have a place in the Polish Lake District, and the lake there, with no Wi-Fi, you'll be amazed to hear, is my favourite place in the whole wide world. I love jumping off the jetty and swimming in the cold water.
Lovely. I didn't know Poland had a lake district.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely checking that out. I was going to ask you to give the exact location, but I don't want it to be flooded with, don't want to taint it. No. Question number 6. Your number one item that you could use to help you make friends with people.
Conversation cards.
Great
I
idea.
of conversation cards, and if I'm going to a meetup or going to meet new people, I'll take them with me.
Brilliant. There we go. That was the quick fire 6. And that is the end of the Mix 6 podcast. Thank you so much for listening. No, we're going to dive a bit deeper now into why you're here and what you represent, Lara. We have 6 Mix 6 questions, which we're going to crack through. And we're going to finish with a mystery question suggested by a young person. We put a story out on the socials earlier in the week and asked for young people to get involved and submit their questions, which they did. And we'll get round to that towards the end. But firstly, wanted to start right at the very beginning, make it as wide as possible. So your first question for the Mix 6 today, Lara, is how do you define loneliness, especially from the perspective of young people?
Great question. I would define loneliness, and this is kind of goes against all the stereotypes of what you think loneliness would be, but I would actually define it as not necessarily being physically alone. So you can be surrounded by people, whether you're at home with your family or at school, surrounded by friends, but you might still feel lonely. And that's often a misconception of loneliness. And I think that's why it gets misinterpreted. And we often don't realize we're feeling lonely, even though we are. So that's how I would define loneliness. For example, if you're in the playground at school or in a lesson and you're surrounded by people, but you feel like you just don't quite fit in or you don't belong, that's loneliness.
That's really interesting. I feel like that topic comes up a lot. Like, what's the difference between loneliness, like feeling lonely and feeling alone?
Mm.
And I think you're completely right. You can be, and I've had this feeling before, surrounded by people at university or just the workplace or even just out and about, and just have this overwhelming sense of it's almost disconnect in a
Mm.
way, and you just feel so alone and so isolated.
Mhm.
And with alone, I don't know about you, but I actually feel okay sometimes when I'm alone. It's quite tranquil. Sometimes I
Yeah.
crave being alone. So
Mhm.
would you say it's really important to distinguish the two?
I think it is. I think it's really important to become self-aware about how you feel when you're alone and how you feel when you're surrounded by people. And I think it almost goes beyond, for example, being an introvert or an extrovert, because I think that's almost trivializes it. I think it can become a little bit confusing. But the main thing for me is if you are surrounded by a group of people and you just don't feel like you quite fit in, I think it's important to then come back to yourself and maybe even spend some time alone to connect to yourself, because actually I think that's the first point of call when you're feeling lonely, to realize why that might be the case.
And I think this is a nice segue into question number 2. Is that what happened to you? Like, I want to find out a bit more about your own personal journey with loneliness. Like, what was the process? How did it shape
Mm.
you?
Well, firstly, I think everybody's experience of loneliness, especially as a young person, is so nuanced. Every young person is different. Everybody's different. But for me personally, I grew up as an identical twin. So I have 3 other siblings. I'm one of 4. And I grew up with an identical twin who looks pretty much exactly the same as me. We've got exactly the same DNA. Like my mum and dad struggle to tell us apart. Um, and we were joint at the hip. But Katie, my identical twin, and she won't mind me saying her name, she was always a little bit more extroverted than me, a bit louder. And in retrospect, I think I hid behind her a little bit when we were growing up. I was a little bit more shy, a bit more conscientious, a bit of a teacher's pet, which is all fine. And then when we hit the age of 13, my identical twin, Katie, got very poorly. She developed a mental illness called anorexia, which is an eating disorder. And Katie was unable to go to school anymore, which meant that I was left all by myself. And I didn't quite know how to navigate being by myself. I didn't really know how to make friends without Katie. And instead of speaking up about it and telling somebody how I felt, I just pretended that I was okay. And all the while I pretended I was okay, I began to feel increasingly and increasingly lonely. And I kind of built up this identity for the next kind of 10 years until I was at university of just being there to help another person. So my sole purpose was to help my twin sister get better. But actually, in the meantime, I kind of lost myself because I wasn't connected to myself. I just made my whole identity about helping other people. So that's kind of where my experience of loneliness stemmed from. And it's only kind of around the age of, well, I'd say maybe 23, 24, that I actually realized that I'd been really disconnected from myself for a long time. And that's when I started looking into loneliness and realizing how common it is and how I wasn't actually alone, and it wasn't unusual how I felt. It's just people don't often talk about it.
And how did you turn that discovery and that education into something positive?
I have always kind of alchemized my struggles. So when my sister was ill, my response to that was by learning everything I possibly could about the mental illness and eating disorder world, which I knew nothing about. Um, and through that, I then turned that into when I was doing my A levels. I did a whole research project about eating disorders and art therapy because I loved art. I love creative stuff and how creativity can help people who are suffering with their mental health. So that's how I alchemized that struggle. And then when I was 22, I experienced another quite traumatic event. My dad died, and I, instead of kind of dwelling in the loss, I researched grief because I'd never experienced it before. I still had all four grandparents. I didn't, the only thing I'd ever lost was my pet tortoise. And I didn't quite know how to navigate it. So I kind of seeked out community, seeked out people who could understand. And that's when I started to use writing to express my grief, express my sensitivities, which was always kind of seen as quite a negative thing, me being really, really sensitive. But actually, I feel like that's allowed me to connect with people on a much deeper level. And then that kind of goes on to the loneliness stuff. I identified that I did and always felt a little bit lonely and disconnected. So my natural response to that was to not only seek people who could understand, but create a space where people felt safe and felt able to come to when they felt alone and like they didn't fit in anywhere else. Does that answer your question?
100%. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And what a journey, hey? It feels like you've really gone through it to come to this point now. Just one more question. How do I know if I'm talking to you or Katie right now? You said you're
Well,
identical.
you honestly, You don't know.
You don't know, no. Um, well, thank you, Katie. And I wanted to pick up just one more thing, what you said just back then, and it was about how people aren't talking about this. People don't want to talk about loneliness. I would argue that everybody feels lonely at some point, especially young people. And it's still a taboo subject. It's still quite a lot of stigma around it. How does that affect the Lonely Club? It's very much what it says on the tin. You're not making it very subtle. It's a club for people who feel lonely. Has that affected it at some point? Or are people that come along, they're quite open to talk about it? How does that work?
I think initially when I set up the community, I did receive comments of like people won't approach it because loneliness is such a taboo, and it's almost something that people are scared of talking about, which is something I still come across now. But kind of, I feel like the more you talk about it and the more you normalize loneliness, the less scary it comes because, exactly as you said, everybody experiences loneliness. It's just there's a barrier between what we experience inside of ourselves and what we allow the rest of the world to see. And I
Hmm.
guess what the Lonely Club is doing is trying to bridge that gap. I've always been a bit like anti taboo, like, why can't we talk about these things? Especially as in Britain, like
Yeah.
everyone's a bit stiff upper lip. But if you're authentic, if you are true to who you are, then there's nothing wrong with talking about things like loneliness, which is very real.
Moving on to question three, Katie. With the rise of tech and social media, obviously your events, they're advertised online, but it's real in real life meetups, brunches, walks. With social media, it's a tricky beast, and it feels like we are, all of us, not just young people, we're all more connected than ever. So the golden question is why do you think loneliness is on the rise if we've got all of these gadgets that are helping us connect with one another?
I think it's a mixture of a number of things. I think for young people today, especially, it's it's very much connected to like the pandemic and going through that and the increase in social anxiety. Like there's a lot of research around that. And especially for people who are more introverted as well, social media can be something to hide behind and it can become a lot more comfortable to communicate on social media where there's less rejection, there's less uncertainty about how people might react, and it's easier to just switch off and throw your phone across the room than being rejected face to face by somebody and experiencing that social anxiety. So I think, but paired with that, I think one of the reasons loneliness is on the rise is that communicating online and solely connecting online can't replace in real life connection. Like as humans, we are made to connect and find our tribe, and nothing can really replace that, which is why I think social media can be invaluable for planting those seeds of connection, but ultimately it needs to be facilitating offline connection and meeting people, connecting, socializing in person. Um, and that I think ultimately will start to tackle the loneliness epidemic amongst young people.
Moving into question number four, I wanted to ask, obviously you shared your journey about how you dealt with loneliness and where that's brought you to life now. What are some practical tools and techniques that you've personally developed to help manage your loneliness that you can perhaps pass on to our listeners today?
Mm. So I actually came about the practice of yoga when I was 14, which was actually used as a tool to help my sister when she was ill. It was kind of used to help her connect to herself. And that was actually a tool that we used to bond with each other because we both developed this like passion in yoga from quite an early age. So I started practicing that quite early on. And then as I got older, it became a little bit more about not just yoga as a practice, but as a way to connect to myself. So I started to learn more about meditation, and also just build like the connection between the mind and the body, which is so interesting. Um, and then from there, my interest kind of evolved into writing and journaling. Journaling is something I think is invaluable, um, especially if you're somebody who has a lot of thoughts going around in their head a lot of the time, which was very much the case for me growing up. I actually started writing a diary from the age of 10. I wrote a diary every single day. And I guess maybe that's why I'm interested in what I am now, because I naturally came to that as something that offloaded all of the thoughts in my head and put them onto paper, which I think is so useful. Another thing that I think is really helpful is finding somebody, a safe person to voice note. So there's a widget, whatever, on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp voice notes is literally my best friend. Like, I WhatsApp voice note my twin sister, my best friend, and it is a way to just offload everything onto somebody who also feels comfortable doing that to you as well. So it's kind of this mutual exchange. Um, but that is a self-help tool that actually I think is massively underestimated. Um, Apart from that, I think counselling and therapy is brilliant to understand yourself a little bit better. And I don't think there should be any shame around asking for help in that.
100%. Obviously, the mix provide counselling to under 25s, and it's just incredible to hear the benefits even just a short-term 6-week program does to help young people. I think if only more young people, if anybody knew more about counselling, they'll just truly understand what it
Mm.
can do. I love for everything that you mentioned there, the yoga, the journaling, the voice clips, and the counselling. There was that underlying theme of connecting with yourself, getting to know yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and on the theme of loneliness, it's almost like being friends of yourself. Would you
think
say?
there's such a massive element of self acceptance. And I think that's something I've only come about recently. And it's something I wish I tapped into earlier on, and something I wish someone had told me. Because when you start accepting yourself and treating, and I know it sounds cringe and cliche, but like genuinely talking to yourself, even nicer than you would talk to a friend, especially when you're someone who maybe is a bit critical and has a lot of doubt and, oh, I'm not good enough, and comparing yourself to other people. Self acceptance is so important. Um, and tools like affirmations and mantras and stuff is
Mm.
so useful for that.
And I guess a part of it is what you mentioned works for you, but it's important to say that go out, experiment, see,
Mhm.
find out what works for you. It could be journaling, it might not be journaling, it could be yoga, but it might not be sending voice clips to your friends. And I think
Exactly.
it's really important to keep an open mind with that sort of stuff as
Yeah.
well, especially if you are going through something, to keep your mind occupied and to work out ways to cope with what you're going through. It's really
Mm.
important. Um, Question number 5. We've got very simple question, and it is maybe it's not so it's simple to ask it. I don't know if it's simple to answer it, but what's one piece of advice that you wish you had been given when you were a teen, and that you can pass on to anyone who's listening now?
That it's okay to be different, and you don't have to spend your life trying to fit in with everybody else's expectations of you. And just in general, everybody is so different. And I mean, I'm an identical twin, and still me and my identical twin are so different. But it's appreciating those differences and loving those differences as well, because
Mhm.
that is what makes you unique. um so I wish somebody told me earlier on that it's okay to be different. And it's also okay not to be okay all of the time. And you don't need to hide that, because actually that's what makes you human. And that vulnerability allows you to connect with other people a lot better.
I guess that's perhaps why the Lonely Club works so well, because it is exactly what it says on the tin. You're not hiding away from it. You're almost encouraged to be vulnerable. Okay, I am lonely. This might be the club for me, so I can make connections and manage this in an authentic way. We reached the sixth and final question, and this is a question I didn't know existed until this morning. We had a good handful of questions come in. Actually, I'm going to ask you two. One of them isn't actually a question, but it was just really lovely, so I thought I'd mention it. And it was essentially, it's not a question, but what you're doing is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much. It's
Oh,
so nice, so nice, so lovely. So thank you so much to those to everybody that submitted questions. We decided to go with one that actually captures the themes of the rest of the questions, and it's around social anxiety. So this was the mystery question submitted by a young person, and it is: I suffer from social anxiety as well as loneliness. What are your tips for someone who has chronic anxiety so I can overcome loneliness and make connections with people?
yeah, I hear you. I think number one, how amazing is it that you can recognize that in yourself and say it kind of out loud? Because that level of self awareness will allow you to go very far in terms of seeking those connections. So number one is accepting that that's how you feel, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling like that. And actually, there are so many benefits of that social anxiety that you probably don't even recognize right now in terms of traits in yourself. Um, for example, you're probably a lot more empathetic towards other people who are a little bit more timid and anxious in social situations, which is an amazing trait to have. Number two, my most important tip is to be open about how you feel, especially with somebody that you trust, and not to push down those anxious feelings, but instead let them come up to the surface and be honest with how you're feeling. And don't try and pretend to be really extroverted or sociable, or push yourself to be in social situations you don't feel comfortable in just because that's what you feel like you should do. Um,
Mhm.
the most important thing is to seek out support from the people around you and not be too hard on yourself, because there shouldn't be any expectations for you to do anything you're not comfortable with. And I think by doing those things, you will find people who you can relate to, and who will meet you where you're at. And quote unquote find your tribe. Like, you will find your people. I haven't even found my people yet, and I'm nearly 30.
But that's not stopping you from
No.
going out there. No.
uh,
I think that was a great way to end a great podcast. What do you think, Lara?
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
Katie. Sorry.
I answer to both. I don't even know
um, I wanted to just drop in one final question. If you were going to summarize this whole chat into, I'm going to make it hard for you, into one sentence, a key takeaway for our listeners to take with them, what would it be?
This chat was something that I wish my younger self could have heard.
Perfect. And you know what? The beautiful thing about that is that people who probably around the same age as your younger self are listening to this now and making those right movements, hopefully. So, yeah, what an amazing way to end. Just before we go, Lara, how can people find out a bit more about you and what you do with the Lonely Club?
Um, yeah, so my Instagram handle is underscore the Lonely Club. Very easy to find. Bright pink and yellow logo. Um, and you are more than welcome there. So come and slide into my DMs, and
Hmm.
I would be happy to speak to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lara. And if you wanted to find out more about The Mix, just search themix.org.uk or say hello on the socials. While you're trying to find a lonely club, you can also find The Mix at Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. We're probably there, maybe even spare room. I don't know. But thank you so much, Lara. Do you know what? It's been, and I say this in the most authentic, genuine way, an absolute pleasure. This is a topic that I really resonate with as well. I think we've all had our own story with loneliness and our own personal journey, and for you to be so open about yours and to show our listeners that there is light there and it's right there for you to grasp it right now. It's just been really inspirational. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You are more than welcome. Have a lovely rest of your Tuesday, and we'll speak soon. Take care.